2. Washington Journal continues.
This is Representative Don Bacon. He is a representative of the 2nd District of Nebraska, a Republican, also a member of the Armed Services Committee, has been deployed to the Middle East several times, including Operation Iraqi Freedom. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Thanks for having me.
How does your experience in the Middle East shape the events that you've seen over the last couple of days?
Immensely. I had 4 deployments to the Middle East. I served a year in Baghdad in 2007 and 8. And during that time frame, most of the Americans who were killed, towards the end anyway, were from the Iranian-trained, funded, armed militias there. In fact, I was on the receiving end of rockets every single day for a year. Between 3 and 30 a day was, I think the least we ever had was 3, the most was 30. And they were all Iranian-made missiles from the Shia militias, supplied and led by the Quds Force out of Iran. And so, you know, as the DoD went back and looked, 17% of our fatalities in Iraq from 2003 to 2011 were from Iranian-trained proxies and militias led by the Quds Force, by General Soleimani. And so, yes, I've been angry at General Soleimani, the Quds Force, for killing over 600 Americans. And I've often thought, why have we not responded? Why are we showing restraint? Is this not emboldening them? And it was. I am grateful that our president finally did some retribution and held the person accountable who killed over 600 Americans. I think it was about time.
Does the assassination, in your mind, further embolden then those Iranians?
Well, the alternative is to do nothing and allow them to keep attacking us. That's not the right answer. I think we hit the right person. To go after a base or some of their infrastructure, we end up killing 18 and 19-year-old Iranians who've had no say. We hit the guy who was the mastermind of killing 609 Americans now in Iraq alone. Doesn't count what he was doing in Yemen, Syria, Saudi Arabia. We had the Khobar Tower attacks in 1996. He wasn't the general at that point, but he was one of the top lieutenants. I lost a friend in that attack. Think about what was going on in Lebanon. The number one enemy of Israel was General Soleimani. He was the number one, or his number one goal was the destruction of Israel. He was anti-Semitism personified, frankly. So I look back, this was not an escalatory. This was holding this guy justice, I would say. He got the justice he deserved. And it's telling Iran, if you attack us, you will get hit back. I think that makes deterrence real. We want deterrence. We don't want war with Iran. Iran needs to know if you strike us, you're going to get hit back. And for 16 years in Iraq, we never did that. I think we're resetting the table so Iran knows they cannot get away with this. So in the end, this will lead to a more peaceful environment, I believe.
How much information, or at least briefing, have you received on what happened concerning General Soleimani?
Well, on the actual mission, we're going to get the intelligence briefing today at 1 o'clock. And I have a little bit of updates yesterday when I came in, but we're going to get the full intelligence briefing today at 1. But I've studied General Soleimani for a decade and a half. I've known since about 2005 his role in Iran. Now, he was the leader for about 5 or 6 years before that, but I learned of him in 2005 and his role in Iraq and the Middle East. So I've always known that he was a top threat to America.
Again, our Capitol Hill correspondent, by the way, Craig Kaplan, saying that those House members, like our guest said, will be briefed at 1 o'clock. Senators will receive a briefing at 2:30 by Trump administration officials concerning the strike against Soleimani. You can ask our guest questions by calling 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, and Independents, 202-748-8002. If you want to text us your thoughts, you can do so at 202-748-8003. Being a member of the Armed Services, you've heard about this vote, not binding, but at least a vote by the Iraqi government about the removal of U.S. forces. Does this concern you?
It does concern me, but here's the other side of the discussion. Only half of the parliament was there, and it was the half that were most attached to the Shia side, more pro-Iranian members of the parliament. Those who were opposed didn't show up to vote. I believe in the end, the Iraqis will know that America is needed. If we pull out, ISIS will control, I think within a year or two, western Iraq, northern Iraq, just like it happened in 2011 when we withdrew. And we have a very small footprint there now. We don't have the number of forces that we used to have. And we're there to help train Iraqis. we're doing very little missions on the ground. I think the cooler heads will prevail. They'll know that America is needed.
We have calls lined up for you. This is from Devin. Devin is in Mesquite, Texas. You're first up for our guest, Representative Don Bacon, calling on our independent line. Devin, good morning. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to kind of add the side note that people need to kind of take into consideration. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that this is a country with a population of 80 million people, and they restrict women's rights. I mean, I can't even count on two hands the amount of protesters I've seen in Iran and even in India, women protesters. They're not allowed to speak for themselves. And a lot of people, mainstream media doesn't like to put that narrative out there.
I want to thank you for your comments. There's some of the most horrifying pictures in Iran where you see people hanging off of light poles on street corners. They also have a history of throwing gay lesbians off the top of roofs onto the street. And so this is not a society that respects human rights and people's freedoms. And it's interesting to see the polling in Iran. They're one of the most pro-American, pro-democratic people, but the government is run by mullahs who do not respect that at all. In fact, they have elections there, but the elections put people in office that do not have a big say in the government. The biggest say comes from the Ayatollah. He's like the Supreme Court, and he can veto anything that the elected officials do. And so our fight is not with the Iranian people, it's with the mullahs, it's with the IRGC, the Quds Force. And we can't forget Iran's the #1 exporter of terror. And we have turned a blind eye to that since 1979, and really over the last 20 years, where they have killed so many Americans. It was time that we responded. And it is my hope that we get a better government and society over time. But that's going to be the Iranian people's decision.
From Arizona in Goodyear, Democrats line, Bill, hello.
Hi, I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I just wanted to make an observation that we're making too big of a deal of this Iranian missile attack. You know, the Viet Cong with their primitive rockets could do more damage than Iran did in this latest attack. So I think it was just a desperate gesture on their part.
I think you're absolutely right. The Viet Cong, and I'm a student of war history, they would come in and their goal was to kill as many Americans as possible. Their goal was to drive us out of South Vietnam. This attack last night and these SRBMs that they fired, the ballistic missiles Iran fired, were very accurate. They had the ability to strike Americans and kill many Americans if they so chose to do so. They knew, though, that our response would be devastating. So it appears to me they intentionally targeted those missiles to miss Americans and to minimize the loss of life. So on one hand, they were trying to save face that they took some action, but they knew to calibrate it very carefully so as not to provoke an overwhelming response from America. And this should be our message to Iran. I think it is the message from our president, which I appreciate. You kill Americans, you will pay a heavy price for it. And that is the right message.
Would you have liked to have seen the president get authority from Congress on this action?
Well, he came in within 24 hours and notified Congress. The law states it has to be 48 hours, so he followed the law. I think if we have continued operations with Iran, there needs to be authorization. But if it's defending America, he has Title II or Article II responsibilities and authorities that he can defend us with, and I think that's appropriate. There is no intention of putting troops in Iran. I think the most we're ever looking at is to say, if you hit us, we're going to create damage back to a point that you will not want to do this again. We do not want war with Iran. We want them to not attack us.
There's expected debate later on this week on the War Powers Resolution Act by Representatives Ilhan Omar and Barbara Lee. What do you think about that effort? And is it time to revisit some of these authorizations and maybe clarify them in this present day and age?
Well, I've been a supporter of relooking at the authorizations of 2001 and 2003. I think there's something wrong when we're in continuous war with authorizations back to 2001 and 3. Now, I support having a minimal presence in Iraq and Afghanistan because that will prevent the Taliban from coming in and taking over Afghanistan or ISIS. And if we just pull out, you will see the Taliban control Afghanistan. You'll see a safe haven for al-Qaeda, a safe haven for ISIS down the road, or the same thing with Iraq. So we need a minimal presence. So I would support authorizations that get to that point. There's something wrong, though, with using a 18-year-old or 19-year-old authorization. I don't think that's what our constitutional founders wanted. Now, getting to the war powers, I believe this is an attempt, again, to attack the president. The president responded defensively to what Iran was doing. And frankly, the folks who were talking about the war powers resolution, and I fear now they're backing off, I think they do not have the support for it right now. So we're going to see, though, that right now, I've heard this morning, the Democrats don't have the votes. Things are shifting. So right now, it's a little bit questionable what they're going to do. But what I have read, frankly, they're using the Iranian talking points, frankly, in these war powers resolution. Nancy Pelosi said that it was a disproportionate strike by President Trump going after Soleimani. Disproportionate. That should offend most Americans. It offends me. That guy killed 609 Americans, and he was the mastermind of it. He deserved to pay for it. And that was not disproportionate. And I think that we want this. If they want to have this discussion, I'm ready to have it because we will win.
Republican Don Bacon with us. He's the representative of Nebraska. He serves the 2nd District. He's also on the Armed Services Committee from Grayson, Georgia. Frank is up next for our guest. Frank, go ahead. You're on.
Hi. Good morning. How you doing?
Good morning.
I was in Iraq in Ramadi back in 2007. I say this about the Iranians: as patience is a virtue to them. We have a 5-year plan; they have a 200-year plan. Okay, I don't want to see another North Korea in the Middle East from our failed leadership of some 40 years when we should have took out North Korea. We need to use, and Trump was exactly right in what he did. He took out a terrorist leader in that country, which will hopefully quell some of their bloodthirst there. And if it doesn't, we need to use this for leverage. We need to keep doing it and bring them to the table, and we need to make sure we have unhindered inspections to their nuclear facilities. If they want to build a nuclear bomb, we need to blow it up. So it's time to lead and stop being these Democrats. We got to talk. We got to talk. We've been talking for 50 years, and look what we got in North Korea.
Okay, thanks, caller.
Hey, I want to thank you. First of all, I served in Iraq same time you did, 2007 and 8. You served in a very dangerous area in Ramadi, so thank you for your service there. And I generally agree with you. Iran is looking long-term. One of the things that was worst about that Iranian agreement that President Obama worked on was that it said within 10 years or at 10-year point that they could pursue a nuclear program and a nuclear weapon, and it would have legitimized that roadmap for them to get a nuclear weapon after a decade. We can never allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. If you just read the statements from the Ayatollah or from Soleimani, who we just killed, they have sworn the destruction of Israel, and they've sworn our destruction as well. And so the handwriting is clear what they want to do and what their intentions are. So I appreciate the comments. They have been our adversary since 1979, starting with the taking of our diplomats hostage, to the attack at the barracks in Beirut in the 1980s, to the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia, and then for 19 years in Iraq, attacking us without a response. It was time that we communicated clearly to Iran, you kill an American, you will pay a heavy price every single time.
It was a couple of days ago that Iran said they will no longer honor the enrichment limits that were under the original deal. What does that mean for the United States and particularly those sites of where that's taking place?
We need to clamp down as much as we can on economic sanctions. We need to choke them. Right now, their oil production is 1/5 of what it was 2 years ago. 1/5. That's why they're lashing out, because they are starving economically. And the more we can do, the better. We need to choke them to the point where they come to the table and actually have a good agreement. If it was just 10 years, the Iranian agreement was good, but you can't accept an agreement that says, okay, after 10 years, you're now cleared in to have a nuclear program and to chase after a nuclear weapon. That was unacceptable. That was the heartburn that Republicans, some Democrats, surely what Israel was concerned with, We gave them a green light after a decade to pursue a nuclear weapon. That was wrong.
What's the potential then for maybe a continued conflict, taking a look at it asymmetrically, either cyber warfare or other means, and what are we prepared to do as far as if that happens?
Iran knows we could destroy their Air Force in a day, their Navy in a day, so they're going to be very careful how they treat us, especially with Donald Trump, because he's proven he'll respond back. And so you're right, they will largely respond asymmetrically. They have a cyber capability, so they will try to do that, but we have a better cyber capability. We can respond. But they will primarily use proxy forces like they've been doing in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria. They control the Hezbollah on the borders of Israel. They are the #1 arms provider and financial provider to Hamas. So that's where the primary threat is, proxy forces. But we have to communicate to Iran, and this president has, even if your proxy forces attack us, it's as if you did it. And we have to communicate that clearly to them. We're going to hold them responsible from here on out.
Are the current sanctions enough at your point, or do you see further ones coming down?
I think we should be as hard as we can on sanctions, drive them to the table. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. They should not be the #1 exporter of terror. And they have over 1,000 ballistic missiles that can hit Israel and our bases in the Middle East. We can't accept that.
Republican line, this is Andrew, Spokane, Washington. Good morning, you're next up.
Good morning. First, I would just like to thank Representative Don Bacon for his military service. And I'd also like to point out that any attack on the United States and her military must be taken very seriously and retaliated to in whatever measure will further discourage attacks on the lives of Americans. If we fail to do that, then we invite further attacks, which puts at risk the lives of our servicemen and women.
I want to thank you for that. I totally agree. I couldn't say it better. Let me go back to a statement that Speaker Pelosi said. She said it was disproportionate, us striking the leader who killed 609 Americans. America should not accept that line of thought. That's right out of the Iranian script and playbook. And it was not escalatory for us to actually respond to their attack. Attacks have been going on since 1979 and in Iraq since 2003. It was time that we responded. And if they know that we're serious to respond when they kill an American, they'll stop attacking us. And in the end, that creates a more peaceful environment.
From Washington, also in Seattle, independent line, James, hello.
Hello. You've talked about Israel's security more than you have the United States. They have nuclear weapons. They can protect themselves. Number two, you Republicans do not believe the intelligence service. You do not agree with the intelligence service. You do not believe Russia. Do you believe that Russia is the one who interfered in our election with Putin? Also, you continue to talk about what is going on with Iran. Iran did not attack America. America interfered in Iran in the 1950s when they had the overthrow of the Shah. You continue to talk about America like America. It's Trump, President Trump himself have said America is not innocent in these things that what's going on. And finally, this is what I want to ask you. Who do you think is the better patriot? John McCain or President Trump?
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bonespur.
Okay.
Well, sir, let me first tell you, I served 30 years in the intelligence, so I cannot accept your statement that I don't believe our intelligence. I was in the intelligence career field for roughly 30 years, and the intelligence is clear. Iran was attacking America since 1979, and the intelligence was clear that General Soleimani led the Quds Force and killed 609 Americans in Iraq alone. That's unacceptable. And I would say, and I know John McCain, he was a supporter of mine. He supported me when I was a challenger, when I was the only Republican to defeat an incumbent Democrat, which was in 2016. And I know President Trump, and I'm just going to say it this way, they're both patriots. And I think that we should not be demonizing. We're getting to the point where the demonization that we see on both sides is wrong. In the end, we're all Americans. We live in the greatest country in the world, and we got to uplift our communications. But the intelligence was clear on Iran. Iran has been attacking us. It was time to respond.
This is from Twitter. This is a viewer saying that, Representative Bacon, you suggest that this attack does not warrant a military response unless intel suggests that Iran is planning a major attack. Aside from that, I fear that if we do engage in a prolonged conflict, that our weary allies may tell us we're on our own this time.
And I think there's a good point. We need to work carefully to strengthen our alliances. I believe that we're the wealthiest country in the world. China has 70% of our GDP, though, and it's growing. Our primary advantage when you look at China and you look at Russia is we have allies. Who are the allies of Russia and China? Russia's allies is Venezuela, Cuba. China's ally is North Korea. We have great allies, and we have to work hard to strengthen them, because in the end, that is an advantage that we have that our primary opponents do not. Who are Iran's allies? So they're getting some aid from Russia, a little bit from China. My point is that I would agree with this, that we need to work closely with our allies and maintain that partnership in this. I don't think we will have a prolonged fight with Iran. I think once Iran knows that we're serious and that we'll respond to their attacks against us, they will be much more circumspect in what they do. And we'll see a more peaceful environment.
Considering the relations now between Iran and Iraq overall, do you still think the war in Iraq was worth it, considering how much influence Iran has?
In 2003, when I was a lieutenant colonel, I felt one way. I would say after you go through 16 years of what has happened, I do not think it was the best solution. The invasion was one thing. What we did after the invasion, we broke things that should not have been broken. We fired the entire infrastructure of the police and the military, and that created the insurgency that we had. So I would say to do it over again, I don't think the invasion was wise. But it's hard to prove a negative. What would Saddam Hussein be doing today? It could be worse. We don't know. But I would say a lot of bad has come from the invasion. And I would say I don't think it was the right decision in hindsight.
From Democrats Line, Salt Lake City, Utah. Mara, hello. You're on with our guest.
I am glad to meet an old neighbor. I was born and raised in Kansas. I think you're just north of me. Now I live in Salt Lake City because I'm converted to the Mormon Church. I'm really old now. I'm 3/4 of a century old, and politics has always fascinated me. It seems like whenever we have a war somewhere, we need to keep troops there, or we might have to go back. And I wanted to ask you, I think that I'm out in left field about this, but like the leader of North Korea, he drives me crazy. I'm worried about nuclear fallout on South Korea and other nations, but I would certainly be tempted to tell him, as a representative of the United States, like the president or something, stop building ballistic missiles or whatever it is that he is doing to threaten the rest of the world, or I'll blow you off the face of the map.
Okay, thank you, caller.
Where we were at 3 years ago, we were close to war with North Korea. When I spoke to General Milley, when he was the Chief of Staff of the Army, not as the chairman, to hear his analysis of what a war would be like with North Korea was frightening. But I've known that before that, but he, made it clear just how ugly a war would be with Korea. In the unclassified papers that we can see, it's assessed that North Korea has 60 nuclear weapons, and they have ballistic missiles that can reach all of South Korea, most of our bases in the Pacific. And so I applaud the president for engaging with North Korea to de-escalate. But one thing we cannot do, we cannot take our foot off the sanctions and the trade embargoes that we're doing to them, because we have to eventually get North Korea and Kim Jong-un to assure us that he's going to get rid of his nuclear weapons and that program and allow us to verify that he's doing it. And until he does that, we cannot take the weight at all off these sanctions or the trade embargo. We need to choke him, just like we're doing in Iran right now, where we've cut off 80% of their oil production. Because over time, North Korea will remain a viable threat, and it's unacceptable. Kim Jong-un is unstable, and he is a risk to the entire theater, and he's a risk to our country.
The briefing that you're expected to receive today, what are you going to ask? And specifically from your experience in the region and otherwise, what do you want to learn?
Well, I already know the history of General Soleimani and the Quds Force. I know their background in killing Americans going back to 1979, but General Soleimani for about 20 years, and particularly in Iraq. So I have all that information. I would be more interested to know exactly what was he doing in Baghdad. He was working with the Iranian Hezbollah militia who attacked us and killed an American a week earlier, that did the rocket attacks on our base, and then the attack on our embassy. So he was actually with the leader of that militia that was doing that. That's as much as we know. We don't know what they were doing, what they were coordinating, what they were discussing. We're hearing in the unclassified reports that they were organizing future attacks against our diplomats and military. But I'd like to hear exactly what was he doing then, and what was the plans in the future that precipitated the attack. But I know enough of the history to say that the targeting of General Soleimani was justified. It killed enough people that alone it was justified to target him. I'd like to hear what was he doing at that moment, what was he planning to do in the future.
There's a tweet from a reporter saying that it's the Pentagon saying that Iran intentionally missed those U.S. troops at bases. Is that plausible? I
think it's very plausible. They had the ability to hit Americans if they wanted. If they wanted to strike U.S. facilities, they had bases that were closer. And the missiles they fired are actually very accurate. They would have been able to program those missiles to hit where we were at if they wanted. They chose not to, it appears, because I think they believe President Trump's threat: you kill an American and there will be hell to pay.
From Fairfield, New Jersey, Kaz, Republican line. Good morning, your last call.
Hi, good morning, Congressman. How are you?
Very good, sir.
Good. So quick little story and then a question. I was working in a mechanic shop before the Iraq war began, and one of the guys working with us left the shop, got deployed for a few months, and came back, and he clearly was not the same. He's no longer working with us. He actually got hired as a fireman elsewhere, which was great. That's a career path he wanted to choose. But a few of the guys I was working with, my friend Tom, we noticed a material difference in his personality once he returned. And I was wondering if you can justify sending, 18, 19-year-old soldiers or Marines back out to Iran for a conflict that can really impact their lives again. And seeing it firsthand, like I didn't serve. I never had the service that my friend did, but coming back, he was really different, and it really upset me.
Okay, thanks, caller.
PTS is real. I had 4 deployments, and on one of mine, I had minor PTS for about 2 or 3 months when I came back. If you're on the receiving end of rockets every day for a year, there's muscle memory that kicks in, and you just can't deprogram that out. And I think of our poor young men and young women who drove convoys in Iraq every day for a year and a half, where IEDs were going off almost every day. I couldn't imagine driving down a street, even in America, for a year or two after that, and not deprogramming, looking for those roadside bombs that were so deadly against Americans. We do not want to send ground forces into Iran. We do not want war with Iran. But we can't allow Iran to attack Americans and not have a response from us. And that's what we've done since 1979. We have been attacked by Iran all the way up until last week, and we have never responded. 609 Americans killed in Iraq by Iranians, by Iranian proxies led by Soleimani. Is that all right? It is not. It was unacceptable, and it was time that we responded. But we do not want war with Iran, and we will not send ground forces there. If we ever get in an escalatory situation, an escalation, we will probably use our Air Force and Navy. We could destroy their Air Force in a day, their Navy in a day. We could put so much more hurt on them that they can do to us that I think they know to be careful. They know this president means it, and that's a good thing.
Representative Don Bacon, Republican of Nebraska, thanks for your time this morning. We'll get another perspective from Democratic Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California. She'll join us to talk about her efforts to block U.S. military action against Iran that's not authorized by Congress. That conversation coming up next on Washington Journal.